says that they, yes, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors. And the same thing to many of you, because I know he said those same words to you. That's who Daddy Jack was. Friends and brethren, there is no greater success on this earth, in this life, than to remember people we're overheard talking. Wow, it's like we have a celebrity here with us. One of the family members said that's because he is a celebrity. You know what a celebrity is? It's someone who's famous, who's well known, and who is celebrated. Indeed, we celebrate Daddy Jack. People in this community far and wide knew and loved Jack Locklin dearly. He touched so many lives. Some under. But he touched many, many hearts. He touched many hearts. Proverbs 18:24 comes to mind. A man who has friends must himself be friendly, but there is a friend who sticks closer. Closer than a brother. Good luck, Richard. Jack was what kind of man was Jack? Jack was a family man. Everybody knew that. He loved his family so much. Being around his family, especially those little ones, it energized him. As privileged to interact with the Locklins on many different ways and manners, I always admired how the face Jack and Josie. Oh, how he loved Miss Josie. And how many times we heard that wonderful story, that lovely, funny story about how he picked her up on a street corner in Denver. A Florida boy who brought a Kansas girl back to Florida to start a new life, to start a beautiful family. And what a beautiful example of a faithful Christian marriage we have. Hear about those things, so I believe Jack certainly adhered to the words. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ, who loved the church and gave himself for her. Ephesians 5:25. He believed those words. What kind of man was Jack? Well, as we've seen here already, Jack was a man of laughter. As we mentioned earlier, joyful. Recently, I was trying to explain or describe Jack to people, someone who did not know him. That's very difficult to do with such a large personality. I finally just said, imagine a real, living cartoon character. That would be Jack. How could you ever forget that humor, his wittiness, his goofy jokes, those songs, those off-colored and offhand and sometimes unfiltered remarks, and has been stated in a unique way. He had it was right on point, and he usually left everybody laughing. He always had a joke, and everybody loved that about Daddy Jack. One of my favorites was when Daddy Jack was coming into Golden Agers class. He loved Golden Agers class. In fact, he loved us. He led singing in Golden Agers class. When I went to visit him a couple of weeks ago, I was singing with Jack. He couldn't talk very well, but he could sing. And in one of those songs that we were singing, he raised his hand as if he was leading singing. But I remember him coming into Golden Agers class, and he was with his walker, and he was coming in, and somebody spoke up and said, well, hi, Jack. We are certainly going to miss Jack. We are certainly going to miss him. This church family is going to miss him. His family is certainly going to miss him. This community will miss him, and Tasty Freeze will never be the same. Above all, what kind of man was Jack? Above all, Jack was a man of God. Jack was a disciple of Christ. When we say larger than life, that applies to Daddy Jack. But why? Why can we say such a thing as that? You want to know what the secret was for Daddy Jack? And he lived his life in that manner. He knew that for sure there was another place he was going. We can't know for sure, of course, exactly what he would say in this moment, but I think if we could talk to Daddy Jack, I think he would remind us to echo the words of the Apostle Paul concerning those who have fallen asleep. Again, even so God will bring with him those who sleep in Jesus. For this we say to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive and remain until the coming of the Lord will by no means precede those who are asleep. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout and the voice of an archangel and with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then he who are alive and remain will be caught up together with him in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And thus we shall always be with the Lord. Therefore, comfort one another with these words. Jack knew just as good or better than anybody that I know that if we will follow Jesus, if we will obey the gospel, that if we will live our lives faithfully, that we will be together again with him, with our Lord, with God in heaven. God bless Jack Locklin.
Our next song will be 882. 882. I'm just the song leader. I'm not supposed to speak, but I'm going to beg the family's forgiveness here. Always greeted Daddy Jack, young man. What do you say, young man? And if you knew what we just heard the words of Troy, if you knew Daddy Jack, he was a young man. I'll share this just to a testament to him. Golden Agers was his thing. As we've just heard, my last Golden Agers class, however, filled him for Troy. He always got up in the middle of it toward the end so he could go to the restroom. He sat in the very back of the class, meaning he had to make his grand exit. So as on his way out, he had to shimmy past one lady. He kissed her on top of the head. The next lady he shimmied by, she had a hat on. He took her hat and put it on his head. And then on his way out the door, he turned around, he let go of his walker, and he did a little jig on the way out the door. As we sing this song, I want you to consider that. Consider the young man. We're going to sing No Tears in Heaven. We're going to weep. We're going to cry, and that's okay. That is okay. But for him, we need to rejoice. Because today, he's a young man again. And we can rejoice for him. So let's sing this song together. No tears in heaven, no sorrows given, all will be glory in that land. There'll be no sadness, all will be gladness, when we shall join that happy band. No tears, no tears up there, sorrow and pain will
Before I begin, the family did ask me to thank all of you who have come today to honor and remember this very special man. Some have traveled great distances, and I think it's safe to say that if Daddy Jack could come up that aisle like he's done so many times, I think you each would bring a smile to his face and a twinkle to his eye. And there are so many to thank during this time, the last few challenging days, and each of you have been such a gift to the family. So, Oscar Jackson Locklin, Sr., known commonly as Jack, known to many of us as Daddy Jack, known to his college buddies as Squinch, and known to some simply as Round Man. With your permission today, out of respect, we will refer to him as Daddy Jack. Daddy Jack loved people, and people loved Daddy Jack. As you've heard in the obituary, Daddy Jack was born in the corner of Stewart Street and Berry Hill in the area of the parking lot right now where that little dance studio is today. He went on to be a double letterman in football and in basketball at Milton High School. So one of the legendary stories from that time was that in his senior year, he was selected as Northwest Florida Conference guard, and the team made it all the way to the state tournament. So they had to go to Homestead, Florida, which is, 700 miles. And they had to ride in the back of a flatbed truck. So to make the trip more bearable, Daddy Jack took his parents' mattress from off of their bed without permission, put it in the back of the flatbed truck so he and his buddies could lay down and sleep on the trip. I understand 5 years later when Daddy Jack was getting married that Miss Sue, his mom, was still talking about that one. So, Daddy Jack started at Florida State in 1947, and it was not a coincidence that it was the first year that university became co-ed. His time at FSU was filled with more than the typical adventures and relationships that would last his whole life. He was a member of Phi Beta Tau fraternity, and he wore that ring to the end of his days. I believe he's wearing it now, isn't he? While at FSU, Daddy Jack was known to some of his buddies as Squinch. He believed they called him that because when he smiled, his eyes squinted. He learned much later on in life that they called him Squinch because they noticed that when he could squinch real hard, he could read the test questions from 3 desks away. And Daddy Jack loved people, and people loved Daddy Jack. As I suspect most of you can imagine, Daddy Jack's academic record at FSU was notable. When Jack Jr. applied to law school at FSU, his admissions was almost completely stopped, literally frozen in his tracks because the undergraduate school made the mistake of sending Daddy Jack's transcripts to the law school. Daddy Jack's academic records were not quite good enough for admission to FSU law. While at FSU, Daddy Jack was a member of our OTC, and for a while he lived in an Army tent in Maybury Field. And many of the GIs, it was hard times. I hear the stories of literally he would make tomato soup out of ketchup and hot water. Living in a tent, literally he tells a story that one of his tent mates shot the lights out of the tent one night just to get ready to settle down and go to sleep. It was a different time. In 1949, Daddy Jack heard that his ROTC unit was going to be shipped to the front lines of Korea. So he joined the Air Force. It turned out his ROTC unit never left the States. But it all worked out. While he was in the Air Force, Daddy Jack was stationed in Denver for his first duty station. We've all heard the story. While he was there, he did happen to meet his bride, Miss Josephine Miller. The story is when he first met her, he first introduced her, he climbed in the car with a couple of dear friends and immediately sat on the cake that she was carrying home for her father's birthday. Rather unceremonial introduction. He eventually did dance his way into her heart, and it didn't matter that she was already engaged. And the way he put it was, she was engaged to some sodbuster. I learned years later this poor young man was a pharmacist. He just happened to live in Nebraska, so we called him the sodbuster. Long story short, Miss Josie ended her engagement to the sodbuster, and about 5 weeks later, in July of 1951, she married Daddy Jack. Their honeymoon was a romantic road trip from St. Francis, Kansas to Denver, Colorado with Claude Sr. and Sue Locklin, and then off to Miami for Daddy Jack's next duty station. Daddy Jack loved Josie, and Josie loved Daddy Jack. Daddy Jack was deployed to Tripoli, and he spent the first 3 months walking around with a clipboard in his hand trying to look busy so nobody would give him a real job. He eventually came back to the States and settled in 1954, and he went to work in his family business, teaching at Allentown. It didn't take Daddy Joe long to figure out that the janitor made more money than he did, so he started looking around, and he discovered the insurance business through a fraternity brother. He became a Farm Bureau agent in 1955, and he and Miss Josie opened Locklin Insurance Agency in 1958. That agency is owned and operated today by Bob in the same location to this very day, and it looks like it might be operated by another generation of the Locklin family in the not too very distant future. That's quite a legacy. It was about that time in 1954, while in Kansas, that Daddy Jack discovered pheasants. The story is he was riding with his brother-in-law and through St. Francis and spotted a bird and asked, what kind of bird is that? And Delmer told him it was a ring-necked pheasant. And he asked, can you hunt them? And the rest is history. There were untold pheasant hunting trips for decades with multiple generations of family and friends, many who are here today, and many have gone on. Those trips have created more stories and great times than anyone could have dreamed. There are friends and family here today from Kansas and who've now become very fond of and have become dear friends as a result of Daddy Jack asking, can you hunt them? Daddy Jack loved people, and people loved Daddy Jack. Daddy Jack was a truly fanatical FSU boaster, as you can well imagine. He bled garnet and gold, and he didn't miss a home game for decades, from 1960s really till Hurricane Ivan. Jack and Joe spent many days following the team to away games, including several of the infamous Road Warrior games in 1981 with Ohio State, Nebraska, and LSU. There's even a story that that Jack and Bert and Claude Jr. actually hosted Bobby Bowden when he was here as an assistant coach looking for talent at Milton High School. The family did basically what the family was not allowed to wear orange. Daddy Jack even missed resetting Jack Jr.'s arm in the fall of '62 because he had to go to the Florida State game. Okay, this is my one personal note. I was given the liberty of giving one of these, so this is mine. When Oscar was 2 years old and just learned how to speak reasonably well, I taught him to say, "Go Gators." I know it was wrong on so many levels. And in fact, today I'm wearing garnet in memory of, as an apology to Daddy Jack. But I taught Oscar to do it. So what happened on a Sunday evening was Oscar was running down the hallway and Daddy Jack was in the foyer. And Oscar would come running up to him and Daddy Jack scooped him up and stared into his eyes with love and affection, that little twinkle. And Oscar came up like, perfect, go Gators. Daddy Jack nearly dropped him. And then Jack Jr. said, if he goes to Florida, you're going to pay for it. So, Daddy Jack was also a dedicated Milton High School booster. For many years, serving and helping the quarterback club and attending countless games. Daddy Jack was even able to watch Oscar play basketball for Pace High School if Pace High School was playing Milton or if Milton didn't have a home game. He was a dedicated fan. Daddy Jack loved people, and people loved Daddy Jack. I've heard it said that when folks are in their later years and become infirm, that so much of their personality comes out, their real, true personality comes out. In the last several years, and to the very end of his last days, Daddy Jack was Daddy Jack. He treated everyone with his own unique way of respect, and he was always happy to see you. He always had a joke, again, some of which we could not be told in mixed company. And he always had a snappy comeback. By the way, for those who know and love him best, I'm going to offer this, and I apologize if I offend anybody, but not really. In a way that only Daddy Jack could say. One of his favorite stories ended with, "Something wrong." I heard that joke more times than you get, and I laughed every time. Because he expected you to, you're supposed to. Daddy Jack loved his family, and his family loved Daddy Jack. To the very end, he spent as much time with his family as he could. He played games, brought candy, and taught his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren Frog on a Courtin'. I've heard that song more times than I can hear it in my dreams. In the last days of his life, when he could barely move, he continued to react by moving his feet and even raising his eyebrows to hear the voice of his grandchildren when they sang to him in the hospital and in the nursing home. It was beautiful to see. So let me conclude with this. Daddy Jack loved people. Daddy Jack loved Josie. Daddy Jack loved his family. And we all love Daddy Jack.